Manila, 1942. A Japanese guard enters the women's barracks at 2 in the morning. 77 American nurses lie frozen in their beds. He doesn't touch them, he just stands there, watching, his flashlight moving slowly from face to face. 10 Iliubs, he'll be back tomorrow night. And the night after that, what the Japanese did to these women wasn't what the world expected. It was something far more calculated. The footsteps always came at night. Lieutenant Josephine Nesbitt learned to recognize them by the 3rd week of captivity. Not the heavy boots of the day patrol, but the deliberate, slow pace of guards who wanted you to hear them coming, who wanted you awake, listening, waiting in the darkness of Santo Tomas internment camp. It's February 1942. The Philippines have fallen, and 77 American military nurses, the women who treated wounded soldiers on Botan and Corregidor, are now prisoners of the Imperial Japanese Army. The world expects the worst. After what happened in Nanking just 5 years earlier, everyone knows what Japanese soldiers do to captured women. Mass rape, torture, murder. But that's not what happens to the angels of Botan. What happens is something the military will classify for 50 years. Something that doesn't leave physical scars, but destroys women just as effectively. Something that starts with a simple Japanese command. Remove the doors. Let's go back to the beginning. December 1941. Pearl Harbor burns, and within hours, Japanese forces attack the Philippines. Manila falls by January 2nd. Trapped on the Bataan Peninsula are thousands of American and Filipino soldiers, and among them 99 U.S. military nurses. These aren't civilians caught in the wrong place. They're commissioned officers in the Army and Navy, nurse corps, trained, disciplined, protected under the Geneva Convention. Or so they believe. As Bataan collapses, the nurses retreat to Corregidor, the island fortress in Manila Bay. They work in underground hospitals carved from solid rock, performing surgeries by flashlight during constant bombardment. When a patient dies, they wrap the body and immediately prep the bed for the next wounded soldier. There's always a next soldier. Lieutenant Ma Davison commands the Army nurses. She's 57, a career military nurse who enlisted in 1918. Tough, methodical. Someone who believes military discipline can overcome any hardship. She tells her nurses that as officers and women, they'll be treated according to international law if captured. She's catastrophically wrong. May 6, 1942. Corregidora surrenders. The nurses are loaded onto trucks, still wearing their sweat-stained khaki uniforms with Red Cross armbands. They're driven through Manila to Santo Tomas University, now converted into a civilian internment camp. 3,000 civilians are already there, mostly American and British nationals who couldn't evacuate. The military nurses expect to be separated, maybe sent to an officer POW. Instead, they're shoved into the main compound with everyone else. 77 Army and Navy nurses, plus 11 civilian nurses who worked in Manila hospitals. 88 American women surrounded by Japanese guards who look at them with an expression that isn't quite hatred and isn't quite lust. It's something colder, more calculating. Captain Ethel Thor, a 26-year-old nurse from Nebraska, writes in a diary she manages to hide for 3 years. The way they look at us, like we're not women, like we're problems to be solved. The first thing the Japanese do is take their uniforms. Not immediately. For the first week, the nurses are allowed to keep their military clothing. They maintain formations, salute Lieutenant Davison. Try to preserve the structure that's held them together through 6 months of combat nursing. Then, on May 15th, a Japanese officer enters their section of the camp with an interpreter. Military clothing will be confiscated. You are not soldiers. You are internees. They're given civilian clothes from the camp's donation pile. Thin cotton dresses, most of them worn items from Filipino families, British housewives, anyone who had to leave possessions behind. The problem becomes immediately apparent. These dresses are tropical weight, nearly transparent in sunlight, and there's nothing to wear underneath. The nurses ask for undergarments. Request denied. They ask to keep their military-issue brasseries and underwear. Request denied. One nurse who refuses to hand over her uniform is stripped by female guards while male guards watch. Maud Davison files a formal protest, citing the Geneva Convention. The Japanese commander listens politely, then informs her through his interpreter that the convention protects military personnel in uniform. You are not in uniform. You are not military. You are internees under the protection of the Imperial Japanese Army. The legal logic is perverse, but airtight. By forcing them into civilian clothing, the Japanese have stripped away their protection under international law. The psychological assault begins immediately. Every morning at dawn, all internees must stand for roll call in the main courtyard. The nurses quickly realize their thin civilian dresses are nearly transparent in the early light. Male guards walk along the lines, counting, but their eyes don't stay on faces. The count takes 30 minutes, sometimes longer. Guards recount sections. Make mistakes deliberately. The internees stand in the sun while guards examine them. Ethothora writes, "I've never felt so naked while fully clothed." But roll call is just the beginning. The real horror is architectural. Santo Tomas was a university. The Japanese have converted classroom buildings into housing. The nurses are assigned to a section of the education building, second floor. About 40 women per room, and space is designed for 20 students. Beds are narrow iron cots with thin mattresses, arranged in rows with perhaps 3 feet between them. Privacy doesn't exist. Changing clothes means turning your back to the room and hoping no one looks. Except it's not just the other internees. Guards enter the rooms at will. No knocking, no announcement. They walk between the beds, sometimes running their hands along the iron frames, making them ring. The nurses learn to sleep in their clothes, learn to change under their dresses like contortionists, learn that modesty is a luxury they can't afford. Then there are the bathrooms. The education building has communal facilities at the end of each floor. When the nurses first arrive, there are stall doors on the toilets and curtains on the shower area. Within a month, the Japanese remove them. The explanation: prisoners might hide contraband in closed spaces. Now everything happens in full view. Guards, male and female, patrol the hallways. The bathroom has no doors, just an open archway. If you need to use the toilet, you do it knowing anyone could walk past. Guard internee, doesn't matter. Your most private functions are now public. Some nurses develop severe urinary problems from holding it as long as possible. Others develop chronic constipation. The camp doctor, himself an internee, reports these issues to the Japanese medical officer. The response: this is to ensure camp hygiene and security. The showers are worse. There's one shower room for nearly 200 women in their section. 6 shower heads, no dividers, no curtains, no schedule that prevents men from walking past the open archway. The water runs for only 1 hour each morning and 1 hour each evening. You either shower in full view or you don't shower. Josine Nesbitt writes to her sister in a letter that will be confiscated and destroyed. "I haven't felt clean in 2 months. Not because I can't bathe, but because I can't bathe without being watched. Dirt on skin you can wash off. The feeling of eyes on you, that doesn't come off. But the worst is yet to come." The inspections. At first, they're random. A guard enters the barracks, points to a woman, and gestures for her to stand. Then, through an interpreter, or in broken English, the command: "Show pockets." The woman turns her pockets inside out. If she's wearing a dress without pockets, she has to lift the hem to prove there's nothing sewn into the lining. Then the inspections become more thorough. Empty your bed. The woman must strip her mattress, shake out the thin blanket, show there's nothing hidden in the pillow. While she does this, the guardwathes sometimes touches the fabric, runs hands along the seams, then check clothing. This is where it becomes intimate. The guard doesn't necessarily touch the woman herself. He doesn't have to. He orders her to run her own hands along the seams of her dress, from collar to hem, demonstrating there's nothing sewn inside. If she's wearing a belt or scarf, she must remove it. If her dress has buttons, she must unbutton enough to show there's nothing hidden against her skin. Some guards take it further. They bring female Japanese guards, who do the actual touching, but the male guards stay in the room, watching. The female guard runs hands down the woman's sides, checking for items hidden in waistbands, checks the seams of brass, if the woman has managed to keep one, checks sock cuffs, the space between breasts, anywhere something small could be concealed. The explanation is always contraband. The Japanese are paranoid about hidden radios, money, maps, messages to resistance fighters, and yes, internees do smuggle these things, but the searches happen far more frequently than contraband is found. They happen to the same women repeatedly. They happen at 2 in the morning when it would be easier to search during daylight. The message becomes clear. Your body is not yours. We can access it whenever we want, however we want. Lieutenant Davison tries to maintain discipline. She creates a rotation so nurses are never alone during searches. She files protests with the camp. She teaches the younger nurses how to disassociate, to make their minds go somewhere else while hands move over their bodies. But even Davison can't protect them from the night inspections. It starts around month 3. Guards begin entering the women's barracks after lights out. They carry flashlights and move slowly through the rows of beds, shining light on sleeping women. Sometimes they just stand there. Other times they pull back blankets to see if anyone is hiding something beneath them. The beam of light moves down bodies, pausing, examining. The nurses learn to sleep on their sides, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around themselves, the most modest position possible. But modesty doesn't matter when someone is pointing a flashlight directly at you in the dark, when you can hear their breathing above you. When you don't know if this is the night, they do more than look. Captain Vera Chapman, a Navy nurse, breaks down after 6 weeks of night inspections. She's found one morning having torn her dress into strips, trying to fashion some kind of covering that feels secure. She's placed the strips over her body like armor. Maud Davison holds her while she sobs, "I can't sleep. I can't sleep because I don't know when they're watching." This is the genius of the Japanese strategy. They've discovered that you don't need to rape a woman to violate her. You just need to make her understand that rape could happen at any moment, that her body is accessible, that privacy and safety are illusions you allow her to believe in until you choose to dispel them. And there's another element. Medical examinations. The Japanese require monthly health inspections for For the men, this means checking for malaria, dysentery, malnutrition. For the women, it includes gynecological exams. The camp has 1 Japanese medical officer and 2 orderlies. All male. All male. The female internees are told to report to the clinic for reproductive health screening. When Davison demands female medical staff perform these exams, she's informed no female doctors are available. When she cites international protocols about same-sex medical care for prisoners, the response is familiar. You are internees, not prisoners of war. The exams are conducted in a former classroom with paper screens providing minimal privacy. Other internees wait outside and can hear everything. The exams are thorough, more thorough than medical necessity requires. They take longer than they should, and they happen monthly, like clockwork, a reminder that even the most intimate parts of your body can be accessed on a schedule. Some women refuse. They're denied food rations until they comply. Others try to hide during exam days. The Japanese simply search the barracks and drag them to the clinic. Resistance is possible, but it only prolongs the inevitable and adds public humiliation to private violation. Here's what makes it worse. Many of these guards aren't monsters. They're young conscripts from rural Japan, following orders, who might be uncomfortable with what they're doing but do it anyway because that's what soldiers do. Some even seem apologetic. They bow before entering the barracks. They avert their eyes slightly while conducting searches. This almost courtesy makes it more disturbing, not less. They're violating you politely, and the Japanese command structure knows exactly what it's doing. In 1999, when American and Japanese war archives were partially researchers discovered internal Japanese military communications from 1942. One memo from the Philippine Military Administration's POW Affairs Department laid out explicit strategy for handling captured American nurses. Female military personnel represent unique propaganda value. Physical harm would create martyrs and justify enemy retaliation against Japanese prisoners. However, psychological pressure through dignity extraction maintains control while preserving exchange value. Recommend removal of privacy barriers and frequent personal inspections. American females have cultural shame regarding bodily exposure. This can be exploited without violating international observation protocols. Dignity extraction. That's the phrase they used. Not torture. Not abuse. Dignity extraction. Like it's a resource to be mined from prisoners until they're empty. The strategy works. Beaumont 4, several nurses have stopped eating properly, not because food is scarce, though it is, but because they've developed a logic. If I'm smaller, maybe I'm less visible. If I take up less space, maybe they'll stop noticing me. Others develop obsessive behaviors, washing hands until they crack and bleed, checking and rechecking their beds for contraband that isn't there, trying to find what the guards are looking for so maybe the searches will stop, counting footsteps in the hallway, trying to predict when the next inspection will come. This is trauma without wounds. This is violation without violence. And because there are no physical scars, because the nurses aren't beaten or raped in the traditional sense, their suffering becomes invisible, even to each other, sometimes. But they're still military nurses, still trained, still disciplined, and they begin to fight back in the only ways available to them. The resistance starts small. The Japanese have forbidden military structure among no saluting, no formations, no reference to rank. Fine. The nurses develop code. They arrange their beds in order of seniority. When Lieutenant Davison walks through the barracks, she touches the foot of certain beds in a specific pattern. Information passes this way. Orders, encouragement. Reminders that they're still a unit. They share resources. The Japanese allow occasional Red Cross packages, though these are heavily searched and many items confiscated. What gets through is divided equally, regardless of who receives the package. A nurse who gets soap shares it with 10 others. A can of milk is measured out in spoons, so everyone gets a taste. They maintain medical practice in secret. The Japanese have confiscated most medical supplies, fearing they could be used by resistance fighters. But the nurses hide what they can. A nurse named Eleanor Guerin keeps 3 aspirin tablets sewn into the hem of her dress for 6 months, refusing to take them herself, saving them for someone who needs them more. When another nurse develops a severe fever, Guerin carefully opens the hem, removes 1 tablet, and administers it. She sews the hem back up with thread pulled from her own clothes. They create privacy where none exists. Hanging a towel from a bed frame means occupied. Don't look. Turning your back while someone changes becomes sacred. These tiny acts of respect for each other's dignity become defiance against the system designed to strip that dignity away. And they document everything. Several nurses keep diaries, knowing they'll be confiscated if found, but keeping them anyway. Ethel Thor hides hers in a hollowed-out book, then later in a crack in the wall, then finally gives pages to different women to hide separately. Josephine Nesbit memorizes entries, then destroys the physical pages, planning to write everything down again if she survives. These aren't just personal journals. They're evidence, testimony, proof that something happened here, even if they can't name exactly what it is. But documentation comes with risk. In August 1942, a guard discovers a diary during a barracks search. The woman who wrote it, Lieutenant Helen Summers, is taken to the commandant's office. She's kept there for 6 hours. When she returns, she won't speak about what happened. Her hands shake for 3 days. The message is clear. Your thoughts aren't private either. Your memories aren't yours. Some nurses break. There's no shame in this. Everyone has a limit. A nurse named Dorothy still develops what the camp doctor diagnoses as severe hysteria with dissociative features. She stops speaking, sits on her bed, staring at nothing, doesn't react when guards enter, doesn't flinch during inspections. She's gone somewhere inside herself, where they can't reach her. The other nurses take turns feeding her, moving her limbs so she doesn't develop sores, protecting her because she can no longer protect herself. Another nurse, Captain Mary Brown, attempts suicide. She saves up the tiny portions of quinine provided for malaria prevention and takes them all at once. The dose isn't lethal. She vomits for 2 days, survives, and is placed under watch. When the Japanese medical officer asks why she did it, she says, "Because I wanted one thing that happened to my body to be my choice." But most of them don't break. They bend, they adapt, they survive. Lieutenant Davison becomes a master of calculated resistance. She files formal complaints about everything, knowing they'll be ignored but creating a paper trail. She requests meetings with the camp commandant to discuss administrative matters and uses those meetings to assess his mood, his pressures, any weakness that could be exploited. She learns which guards are more sympathetic, which are cruel, which are simply following orders without conviction. When a new commandant takes over in 1943, Davison requests a meeting and does something brilliant. She thanks him. Thanks him for the orderly administration of the camp compared to others she's heard about. Invokes Japanese cultural concepts of honor and duty. Suggests that his fair treatment of internees reflects well on the entire Imperial Army. She's manipulating him, appealing to his ego and his sense of propriety. It works, slightly. The new commandant reduces night inspections. Not because he's kind, but because Davison has made him see the nurses as human beings whose suffering reflects on his competence. The searches continue, but they're more predictable. Guards still enter the bathrooms, but less frequently. It's not much. But in a place where everything has been taken, not as bad as it was, feels like victory. The nurses also learn to use the camp's civilian population as buffer and witness. Santo Tomas holds about 3,000 internees, including children, elderly, businessmen, missionaries. The military nurses begin integrating with these groups. They volunteer in the camp school, teaching children. They assist in the kitchen. They make themselves visible, known, part of the community. This serves 2 purposes. First, it makes them harder to isolate. A guard might search a lone woman in a barracks without hesitation, but he's less likely to do it in front of 50 civilian witnesses. Second, it creates testimony. If something terrible happens, thousands of people will know. Thousands of people who might survive, who might tell the world. Because, by 1943, the nurses understand they might not all make it out. Malnutrition is severe. Diseases are spreading. Several internees have died from treatable conditions because medicine isn't available. The Japanese make vague promises about repatriation exchanges, but nothing materializes. The war news is controlled. They don't know if America is winning or losing, if anyone is coming to rescue them, if anyone even knows they're here. In this environment, the psychological warfare intensifies. The Japanese begin using favoritism as a weapon. Certain nurses receive better food, better treatment, if they're cooperative. What does cooperative mean? It's deliberately vague. Maybe just not complaining. Maybe informing on other internees. Maybe something more. The commandant's office starts requesting specific nurses for translation, assistance, or medical consultation. These women come back, changed, not always physically harmed, but disturbed. When other nurses ask what happened, the answer is usually, "They just talked to me, asked questions, watched me." The watching, that's the constant. Whether it's guards in the barracks, eyes during roll call, presence in the bathroom, or interrogation in an office, the sense of being observed never stops. Some nurses develop a condition the camp doctor calls exposure, anxiety, rapid heartbeat, difficulty breathing, panic attacks triggered by the feeling of being watched. Even when they're alone, which is rare, they can't escape the sensation that eyes are on them. This is what the title means. What the Japanese did was intimate, not because it was sexual, though sexual violation was always implied, always possible. It was intimate because it invaded the most private spaces of existence, the body's functions, the mind's safety, the self's boundaries. They turned privacy itself into a weapon by removing it entirely. By 1944, conditions deteriorate further. Food rations decrease. Medical care becomes almost non-existent. The Japanese are clearly losing the war, though they don't admit it. Resources that might have gone to internees now go to Japanese military forces preparing for the expected American invasion. But even as physical conditions worsen, the psychological warfare continues. Guards still conduct searches, still enter barracks at night, still deny privacy. The system has become self-sustaining, a machine that runs on humiliation and doesn't need additional fuel. In January 1945, the nurses hear distant artillery. American forces are advancing through the Philippines. Liberation might be weeks away. This creates new terror. Rumors spread that the Japanese will execute all internees before there have been massacres. At other camps, why would Santo Tomas be different? The guards become unpredictable. Some seem nervous, easier to avoid. Others become more aggressive, as if asserting control one final time. The women sleep in their clothes, ready to run if the order comes to evacuate, or if something worse is planned. February 3, 1945. American tanks crash through the gates of Santo Tomas. The 1st Cavalry Division, racing ahead of the main advance, has made the camp a priority target. Internees are liberated after 3 years of captivity. The nurses are found in their barracks, most weighing under 90 pounds, many suffering from malnutrition, but they're alive. All 77 military nurses survive. This is extraordinary. In other camps, mortality rates are 50% or higher. Santo Tomas has a survival rate of 97% among all internees. So did the Japanese strategy work? Did treating them well compared to other prisoners preserve lives? Or is survival, despite systematic psychological torture, not the same as protection? The liberating soldiers expect to find brutalized women. They expect rape victims, physical torture survivors, women who need immediate medical evacuation. What they find is more complicated. The nurses can walk, talk. They don't have visible injuries, beyond malnutrition. To a soldier who just came from battlefields where bodies are torn apart, these women look okay, but they're not okay. Within hours of liberation, the nurses are interviewed by military intelligence. The questions focus on what happened. Did the Japanese rape you? Did they beat you? Did they torture you? The nurses try to explain. The searches, the exposure, they're watching. The interrogators write it down, but you can see in their reports that they don't quite understand. The language they use, invasive inspections, inadequate facilities, psychological pressure, clinical terms that don't capture the lived experience. One interrogator writes, subjects report being watched frequently, but cannot specify exact nature of abuse. No physical violence confirmed. Recommend psychological evaluation. The nurses are heroes at first. They're photographed, interviewed by reporters. Lieutenant Davison receives a medal, but the questions from reporters are awkward. What did the Japanese do to you? Were you assaulted? The nurses try to explain, but it doesn't make good copy. There's no dramatic rescue, no clear villain, no single atrocity that can be packaged into a headline. One reporter, frustrated, asks Ethel Thor, so they didn't actually hurt you? Thor stares at him for a long moment, then says, they hurt us every day, just not in ways that leave marks you can photograph. That quote doesn't make it into the newspaper. The nurses are sent to military hospitals for evaluation and recovery. Physically, they need treatment for malnutrition, tropical diseases, dental problems from years of inadequate diet. Psychologically, they need something that doesn't exist yet. PTSD won't be a diagnosis for another 30 years. Combat trauma is understood for soldiers, but not for prisoners, and certainly not for women. The psychiatric evaluations are revealing. Multiple nurses report nightmares about being watched, difficulty sleeping without light, anxiety in enclosed spaces or, conversely, in open spaces where they feel exposed, inability to undress even in private. One nurse sleeps in the hospital bathroom because it has a locking door, the first lock she's had access to in 3 years. The diagnosis, universally, is anxiety, neurosis, or female hysteria. The treatment is rest and time. Some are given sedatives. They're told to try not to think about it, to focus on returning to normal life. Several are encouraged to marry and have children, as if domestic life will erase 3 years of systematic Most of the nurses don't talk about what happened. When they return home, families want to hear about survival and courage. They don't want to hear about standing naked in a shower while guards walked past, about being touched during searches, about the feeling of eyes on you while you sleep. These stories make people uncomfortable. They don't fit the narrative of heroic American nurses. Some nurses try to return to nursing. Most can't. Being in a hospital, being around male doctors, wearing thin scrubs, it triggers too much. Several have panic attacks during training refreshers. Others simply quit. They get jobs as secretaries, teachers, anything that doesn't require vulnerability or exposure. A few try to tell their stories. In 1948, the military allows limited publication of POW experiences, but when nurses submit accounts, they're heavily edited. Details about the searches, the exposure, the intimate nature of the psychological warfare, these are removed. The official reason: protecting the privacy of the women involved. The real reason: recruitment. The military is trying to convince women to join the nurse corps. Stories about systematic sexual humiliation aren't good for recruiting. In 1953, Congress passes legislation providing compensation for POW. Male prisoners receive payment based on time in captivity and documented abuses. The Angels of Bataan receive compensation for time served, but little recognition of specific abuses. Why? Because abuse isn't documented in ways the system recognizes. There are no scars, no broken bones that healed wrong, no evidence beyond testimony, and testimony about being watched isn't evidence of a quantifiable harm. The experience becomes classified by silence, not officially classified like military secrets, but classified by social agreement that we don't talk about this. It's too uncomfortable, too ambiguous, too intimate. For decades, this is where the story sits. The Angels of Bataan are recognized as war heroes in the abstract. They have memorial services and reunions, but the specific nature of what they endured remains vague in public consciousness. Occasional books mention them, but the focus is on medical heroism under fire, not on what happened after capture. Then, in the 1980s, things begin to change. Feminism's second wave has created language for experiences that didn't have names before. Sexual harassment, psychological abuse, violation without violence. Veterans of Vietnam are finally getting PTSD diagnoses. The understanding of trauma has evolved. Some of the surviving nurses begin speaking publicly. They're in their 60s and 70s now. Many of their fellow prisoners have died. The burden of silence has become heavier than the burden of speaking. In 1983, Ethel Thor gives an interview to a university researcher studying women in World War II. She's 71 years old. She talks about Santo Tomas for 6 hours, describing things she hasn't said out loud in 40 years, about the guards watching her sleep, about changing clothes while trying to stay covered, about the medical exams, about how she still can't use a public bathroom, still locks every door, still sleeps with a light on. The researcher asks, "Why didn't you tell anyone this before?" Thor responds, "I tried. No one understood. They heard prison camp and thought it meant something else. When I said we weren't raped, they thought we were fine." How do you explain that you can be violated every day without anyone touching you sexually? There wasn't language for it. Throughout the 80s and 90s, more nurses come forward. Historian Elizabeth Norman interviews dozens of them for her book, We Band of Angels. The stories are consistent. The exposure, the searches, the watching, the systematic removal of every barrier between the self and the observer. And then, in 1999, the documents emerge. The declassified Japanese military communications that explicitly describe dignity, extraction as a strategy. The memos about exploiting American cultural shame regarding bodily exposure. The clinical, calculated nature of it all, laid out in administrative language. This changes everything. Now there's proof that what the nurses experienced wasn't incidental. It wasn't just the harsh conditions of any prison camp. It was deliberate psychological warfare, planned and executed a strategy. In 2005, the military holds a formal recognition ceremony for the Angels of Bhutan. By now, only 14 of the original 77 are still alive. They're in their 80s and 90s. The Secretary of the Army presents them with certificates honoring their service and acknowledging their suffering. One nurse, asked what it means to finally receive official recognition, says, "It's nice, but it doesn't change anything." The women who needed to hear this, most of them are dead. They died thinking what happened to them didn't count because there weren't scars. The last surviving angel of Bhutan dies in 2015. Her name was Edith Shacklet, and she lived to age. In her final interviews, she emphasized that she wanted people to understand the Japanese didn't need to use traditional torture because they'd found something more efficient. They'd found a way to make your own body feel like enemy territory, to make existence itself an act of exposure. So, what does this story mean? Why does it matter now, 8 decades later? Because it reveals something crucial about violation and violence. We understand rape. We understand torture. We understand physical abuse. These are clear. They leave evidence. They have legal definitions. But what about the systematic removal of dignity? What about being watched until you internalize the watcher? What about violation that happens through presence, through access, through the constant reminder that your body is not your own? This is what the Japanese discovered at Santo Tomas and other camps. You don't need to break skin to break a person. You just need to break the boundary between self and other. You need to make privacy impossible until the victim forgets what it felt like to have privacy, until being exposed becomes normal and feeling safe becomes a distant memory. And this wasn't unique to World War II. It's a tactic that appears throughout history wherever power wants to control bodies. In prisons, in authoritarian regimes, in abusive relationships. The specifics change, but the pattern is identical. Remove privacy, enforce exposure, make the victim understand that their body can be accessed at will. The Geneva Conventions have been updated multiple times since 1945. Modern versions include specific protections for privacy, same-sex medical care, protection from sexual humiliation. These editions exist largely because of stories like the Angels of Bhutan, because the international community slowly recognized that torture doesn't require physical contact. Modern military training includes instruction on psychological warfare and what we now call dignity violations. Soldiers learn to recognize these tactics if captured. Medical personnel receive additional training on the psychological impact of exposure and loss of bodily autonomy. But outside military contexts, this understanding is still incomplete. Survivors of sexual harassment often describe experiences similar to what the nurses endured: being watched, being assessed, having their bodies treated as accessible territory. Victims of stalking report the same erosion of safety, the same inability to feel private even in their own homes. Patients in medical settings sometimes experience similar dynamics when their autonomy is ignored and their bodies treated as objects of examination rather than selves requiring respect. The Angels of Bhutan gave us language for these experiences. They demonstrated that you can survive without being okay. That absence of physical violence doesn't mean absence of violation. That trauma isn't always visible, and violation isn't always physical. There's a memorial now, dedicated in 2010 at the site of the former Santo Tomas camp. It's a simple stone marker with the names of all 77 nurses. The inscription reads, "In recognition of their service and sacrifice, and the dignified strength with which they endured." Dignified strength. Exactly what the Japanese tried to extract. Exactly what these women fought every day to maintain. Through small acts of resistance and solidarity. Through remembering they were officers even without uniforms. Through protecting each other's humanity when the system was designed to strip it away. The story of what the Japanese did to captured female nurses is intimate in the truest sense of that word. It invaded the intimate spaces of existence. The body at rest. The body in function. The mind in privacy. The self in relation to itself. And it did so deliberately, systematically, as a weapon of war. This is the war crime without a name, the torture without marks, the violation that takes years to recognize as violation because it doesn't fit our categories for abuse. But the nurses knew. They knew what was being done to them, even when they couldn't articulate it clearly. They knew that having your dignity extracted day after day leaves wounds that never fully heal. And now we know it too. Because they survived to tell us. Because documents emerged to confirm it. Because enough time has passed that we can finally hear what they were trying to say all along. They hurt us every day, just not in ways that leave marks you can photograph. That's the story. Not heroic, not simple, not comfortable, but true and necessary. Because understanding how power violates dignity without violence helps us recognize it when it happens today. In different contexts, with different victims. The angels of Batan gave us that understanding. They paid for it with 3 years of systematic The least we can do is remember their story accurately, completely, and with the weight it deserves.